Imagine this. It's a beautiful spring afternoon. The park is full of people enjoying the sunshine. Up ahead, someone is walking towards you wearing a spotless white coat. They've probably been waiting months for the weather to finally be warm enough to wear it. And then your dog sees them. Before you can even react, they're charging forward with absolute joy, tail wagging, eyes shining. One giant leap, two muddy paw prints land squarely on that perfect white coat. The stranger is upset. You apologize over and over. Your dog looks delighted, and you wish the ground would open up beneath your feet. If you've ever lived through a moment like this, you're not alone. Almost every dog owner has. But here's the surprising part. The biggest mistake most people make isn't failing to stop the jump. It's believing the jump is the problem. Because by the time your dog's paws leave the ground, their brain has already made the decision. The jump is only the final frame of a story that started several seconds earlier. And until you learn to see those invisible seconds, you'll probably keep fighting the same behavior over and over again. Today, we're going to step inside your dog's emotional world. You'll discover why jumping isn't always about affection, why dogs often seem to ignore everything you've taught them at exactly the wrong moment, and why the most successful owners rarely focus on the jump itself. Because good training doesn't begin when the paws leave the ground, it begins long before that. Most people assume they already know why dogs jump. They're just excited. Sometimes that's exactly what's happening, but not always. The same jump can come from very different emotional states. One dog is overwhelmed with excitement, another is anxious about the approaching person. A third has learned through experience that jumping is the fastest way to get attention. From the outside, those dogs may look almost identical. Inside, they're experiencing completely different emotions. And that matters because behavior is only the visible part of the story. Emotion is what creates the behavior. That's why two dogs can perform exactly the same action while needing completely different kinds of help. But here's where things become even more interesting. Most people believe jumping is always a greeting. Sometimes it isn't. Sometimes the dog isn't trying to say, "I'm so happy to see you." Sometimes they're trying to answer a completely different question. Who is this? Are they coming closer? Will they touch me? What happens next? Dogs gather enormous amounts of information through close social interaction. Getting closer to a person's face allows them to collect visual, scent, and social information far more effectively than standing several feet away. In other words, the jump isn't always an invitation. Sometimes it's an investigation. That changes the way you see the entire situation. Your dog may not be trying to embarrass you. They may simply be trying to understand the world as quickly as possible. Now think about what usually happens during a walk. A person appears in the distance. Your dog notices them. Nothing dramatic yet. They simply look. Then their body changes ever so slightly. Their pace becomes quicker. Their muscles tighten. Their eyes stay fixed a little longer. Their breathing becomes faster. Most owners barely notice these dog hasn't jumped yet. Everything still feels under control, but emotionally the process has already begun. A few seconds later, the leash becomes tight. The excitement builds, and finally, the dog launches forward. To us, it feels sudden. To the dog, it wasn't. The jump was simply the last step in a chain that had been building all along. Think of a kettle sitting on a stove. Nobody notices anything while the water is quietly heating. Everyone notices the steam, but the steam was never the real beginning. Trying to stop a jump after your dog is already overwhelmed is much the same. You're reacting to the steam instead of the heat that created it. Once you start looking at behavior this way, another mystery suddenly becomes much easier to understand. Have you ever wondered why your dog responds perfectly to sit in your living room? But that's usually not what's happening. When emotional arousal becomes too high, the brain changes its priorities. Attention narrows. The exciting event becomes more important than everything else. Research on animal learning has consistently shown that high emotional arousal makes it harder to perform behaviors that have already been learned. The knowledge isn't lost, but accessing it becomes much more difficult while the nervous system is overwhelmed. Your dog didn't suddenly forget what sit means. They temporarily lost the ability to use that skill in the middle of intense emotion. That's a completely different problem, and it requires a completely different solution. Many owners respond by repeating commands: sit, sit, sit. The louder the human becomes, the less available the dog's thinking brain often is. This isn't stubbornness, it's biology. The goal isn't to become louder. The goal is to keep your dog below that emotional tipping point for as long as possible. This is one of the biggest differences between struggling owners and experienced trainers. People often assume experienced trainers are simply better at controlling excited dogs. In reality, they're usually preventing dogs from becoming overwhelmed in the first place. They don't wait for the explosion, they notice the spark. That's why they often look calm while everyone else seems to be reacting. They aren't faster, they're earlier. And that's the real secret. If your dog can still look at you, you're early enough. If they can't, you're already late. So, what do you actually do instead? The answer is surprisingly simple. You stop trying to control the jump and start influencing the emotional state that creates it. Let's go back to that same walk. You're moving down the sidewalk. Someone appears ahead. This time, instead of waiting to see what your dog will do, you begin observing what your dog is feeling. Their ears shift forward, their pace changes, their attention narrows. That's your opportunity, not 5 seconds later. Now, instead of walking straight into the excitement, you calmly create a little more space. Maybe you cross the street, maybe you make a gentle turn, maybe you simply slow down for a moment. Many owners feel like they're giving up when they do this. They're not. They're protecting their dog's ability to think. Distance is one of the most powerful training tools you'll ever have, not because distance solves the problem by itself, but because it keeps your dog's brain run available for learning. Now, something interesting happens. Your dog glances back at you, maybe only for a second. Many people overlook that tiny moment. Don't. That single glance is far more important than most owners realize. Your dog just made a choice. Out of everything happening around them, they chose, even briefly, to reconnect with you. That decision deserves to be rewarded, not because it was perfect, but because it's exactly the direction you want learning to move. The brain doesn't build habits by waiting for perfection. It builds habits by repeating successful decisions. If every time your dog notices a person looks back at you and immediately experiences something positive, their brain starts making a new prediction. A person appeared. I checked in with my human. Good things happened. Little by little, that prediction becomes the new habit. Notice what you're teaching now. You're no longer saying, don't jump. You're teaching, when something exciting appears, this is what you do instead. That difference changes everything, because brains, whether human or canine, learn replacement behaviors far more easily than they erase old ones. Imagine someone telling you, don't think about chocolate. For most people, that's exactly what happens. Now imagine they say, think about your favorite beach. Suddenly, your mind has somewhere else to go. Dogs work in much the same way. Giving them a clear alternative is far easier than simply trying to stop an impulse. That's why endless repetitions of no, off, stop often lead to frustration. Those words explain what the dog shouldn't do. They don't clearly explain what success looks like. The calmest dogs aren't spending every walk resisting the urge to jump. They've learned a different routine. A person appears, they notice, they check in with their owner. Life continues. Eventually, that sequence becomes just as automatic as jumping once was. There's another habit many well-meaning owners accidentally create. Someone smiles at your dog. Can I say hello? Your dog is already bouncing with excitement. You feel awkward saying no, so you agree. The stranger laughs. They pet your dog. Your dog gets exactly what they hoped for. Again, and again, and again. Without realizing it, many owners are teaching this simple equation. See a person, get excited, rush toward them. Wonderful things happen. The dog isn't being naughty. They're becoming extremely good at a behavior that has been rewarded dozens, sometimes hundreds, of times. This is why changing habits takes patience. You're not fighting one jump. You're replacing an expectation that may have existed for years. And that leads to one of the biggest mindset shifts in this entire video. Your walk is not about greeting people, it's about moving calmly through a world full of people. Those are completely different goals. Many owners worry that if they stop letting everyone pet their dog will become less social. In reality, the opposite often happens. A socially healthy dog isn't one that needs to meet everyone, it's one that can comfortably exist around everyone. Think about your own life. You don't stop to hug every person you pass. You notice them, you acknowledge them, then you continue with your day. Dogs can learn something very similar. Real social confidence isn't the need to interact, it's the ability to stay emotionally steady whether interaction happens or not. That's emotional maturity. And it's one of the greatest gifts you can give your dog. Because a calm dog doesn't have a smaller world, they have a world they know how to navigate. Before we finish, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. Most people believe the goal of training is to stop a dog from jumping, but that's actually too small a goal. Imagine two different dogs. The first desperately wants to jump on everyone they meet. They pull towards strangers, they bounce at the end of the leash. Their whole body is screaming, "Let me get there." Their owner manages to hold them back every single time. Technically, the dog never jumps. Now imagine a second dog. They notice the same stranger. Their tail wags. They look for a moment, then they glance back at their owner, take a breath, and continue walking. Both dogs kept four paws on the ground, but only one of them was actually calm. That's the difference between controlling behavior and changing emotion. One depends on the owner's strength, the other depends on the dog's understanding. One lasts only as long as you're holding the leash tightly. The other stays with the dog even when the leash becomes loose. And that's the kind of learning that changes everyday life. If your dog has been jumping on people for months or even years, don't expect the habit to disappear after a single weekend. Remember, every jump they've ever made has been practice. The brain becomes more efficient at whatever it repeats. The encouraging news is that this works in your favor too. Every calm choice is practice. Every moment your dog notices someone, stays emotionally available, checks back in with you, and discovers that nothing bad happens, their brain is quietly building a new pattern. Real progress usually doesn't look dramatic. In fact, it often looks almost boring. Maybe today your dog looked back at you once. Tomorrow they recovered a little faster. Next week they walked past one stranger without pulling. Those moments are easy to underestimate. Don't, because lasting behavior change is almost always built from hundreds of small successes, not one spectacular breakthrough. Then one day something unexpected happens. You're walking through the same park. Someone passes by wearing another spotless white coat. Your dog notices them, looks for a second, keeps walking, and only afterward do you realize what didn't happen. No pulling, no jumping, no embarrassment, no apologies. Just another peaceful walk. That's how real success usually arrives, quietly, almost without you noticing. And perhaps that's the biggest lesson of all. The next time your dog jumps on someone, don't ask, "How do I stop this?" Ask a different question. What happened 30 seconds before the jump? Because that's where the real training begins. Not on the person's jacket, not at the end of the leash, but inside your dog's emotional world. Your dog was never trying to embarrass you. They weren't trying to ignore you. They weren't trying to make your walks more difficult. They were responding to the world with the emotional skills they had at that moment. Your role isn't to punish those emotions. It's to help your dog develop better ways to handle them. Because dogs don't jump because they forget their manners. They jump because emotions speak louder than manners. And when you stop seeing the jump as the problem and start seeing it as information, everything changes. You stop reacting to the last second, you begin shaping the first one. And that's where lasting training has always begun. Not with a correction, not with a louder command, but with understanding. Because when you understand what your dog is feeling, you can finally teach them something better to do. And that changes far more than a greeting. It changes the relationship you build together every time you step outside.